All right. Welcome to the Eighth Note Sessions. I'm Devin Mullen.
And I'm Mike Shamil.
And today we're joined by Isabel and Max, members of the specter of Tina Panic Noise. Folks, this is a seance, and we're so lucky to have them come to join us in conversation. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Beautiful. So I wanted to start this interview off with, reading a bio from the band. So Tina Panic Noise is Isabel, Max, Shen, and Justin. Born out of the boredom, with mundane white cis-hetero society and its ever-deepening desire to oppress, Tina seeks to address the issues of the mentally ill, the queer, and the looked down upon. Formed in Buffalo, NY, she is screaming to be heard above the rusted machinery, corruption, and cold winters. What a bio. To start off with, I wanted to talk to you both about the process of being boldly political with music, specifically with punk, where that comes from, and why.
Well, for me, okay, so, you always say, write what you know, and I don't necessarily believe that. I think that you can write whatever you want. But when I started writing the lyrics that would eventually form into the first Tina Panic Noise songs, I was trying so hard to navigate through an intensely just desperate mental health space. And so I started writing these songs, and that was all I could think about. It was all I could process. And a lot of the songs, especially at that time, were about different things that I was experiencing. They didn't really seem connected, but for me, they were wild. They were very intensely connected. And then as it grew and I began to look at what I was writing more and more, I started to look at my history of I think at that point I'd been out just about 3 years, because I came out in 2013. We started writing these songs in 2016. Just about 3 years I had been out, and I was thinking a lot about my experiences with that, and then also being Latina and my experiences there, and just everything, and it kind of culminated into this very angry sound, and I needed to get that out.
Mm-hmm. What I really appreciate about what I really appreciate about that is that it's sort of a callback to the radical roots of punk, which is very much concerned with the social commentary, with the sort of raging against the, either the stodginess or the ignorance of mainstream society. As I said, it's definitely a choice, though. Do you find that in this community that there's a cohort of people, either punk musicians or in other forms, who are, generally speaking, engaging with this kind of social critique in their music?
I would say for the most part, yes. I think that... Are you speaking strictly from Buffalo perspective?
Yeah, I would say locally, because globally anything's possible.
Yeah, yes.
Globally.
I think that Buffalo is so interesting. We have some friends in Pittsburgh who describe Buffalo as Pittsburgh but years behind, because our steel fell out so much longer. That's like the classic evolution of Rust Belt cities. Your steel falls out, or your industry, whatever falls out.
Your industry is.
And then over some time, there's some cultural revolution that happens, and then you become a more woke city, and then you get hyper gentrified, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we are in this early stages of gentrification, I think. Even though Buffalo is extremely gentrified, it's nowhere near the level of Pittsburgh and Chicago and Philadelphia to some aspects. And
you can certainly see it when you travel around these other cities that have become very much that way.
Yeah, and so I think that because we're slightly behind, we can kind of see the painting on the wall. And so I think there is this desperate anger amongst a lot of our musical community that's just like, it's just rage. whether we know what to do with that rage, whether we're channeling that rage into the right areas, that's up to everyone's individual interpretation. But I think that yeah, there's a weirdly like deep rage in this city that's really interesting to witness.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Again, though, I think where perhaps some different groups differ is, just in how focused that is, if it's focused, and what it gets focused on, too. One thing where I think Teen Panic Noise was a little more unusual, it was in the direct focus on discussing kind of more or less the day-to-day reality of being a queer person, of being especially a trans person, which is Isabel's lyrics, some of the songs, chemical castration, particularly very, very directly address. And it is something you don't hear as much in music, both, Buffalo and in a broader sense. So that was something I think niche-wise that we filled nicely, in that time.
So it's sort of a change of tact. Generationally speaking, we spoke about this in our pre-interview conversation. This sort of return to a more combative, direct form of self-advocacy, specifically with the queer community, specifically with trans folk and trans women of color in particular. Do you think that the circumstances of the day, where trans rights are under attack at the legislative and social political level, that being not belligerent, but being more directly confrontational with things is sort of a necessary tact to take? That sort of sitting back and kind of, just enduring everything forever might not carry as much water as common wisdom would suggest.
So I think that there is there's somewhat of a difference between general advocacy and self-advocacy, in my opinion. I think that being openly and visibly trans is in itself a combative act. Mm-hmm. I personally have no desire to pass within the social construct. I'm very, it's taken me a very long time, but I'm very comfortable with how I look, how I sound. I know that very often people clock me immediately like, oh, you're trans. And I still get sirred and stuff. And I generally let it roll off of me, but I immediately, every time go, it's ma'am. Mm-hmm. Or honestly, my thing is, you don't have to gender me. Every day that I walk out the door, being honest with myself, it is a combative act. I have to kind of walk out the door with my fists raised, like, what's going to happen? I think in a larger sense, there's a level of combativeness that has to happen with advocacy. You have to be willing to speak up, speak loud, and speak for your siblings. But I think also, too, that also comes in the hand of where true allyship lies. I think that especially when it comes to people who are visibly trans, people aren't always willing to be so upfront with their allyship. I've been very, very blessed that my best friend in the world is extremely willing to stand next to me. Right. And there's been times where I've kind of like overheard him defending me when people have been shitty with me. I'll never forget one time we were outside a bar and somebody was just being awful. And I usually do good holding my own. And he knows that when I'm in like an argument with somebody, I just let me do my thing, because I'm in like chess mode. I'm like, I want to fight verbally. And I got shit with the dude, and I threw my cigarette and walked away. It was beautifully dramatic, very cinematic. I was like, fine, and I just walked away. And before I could get into the bar, I heard him like take a deep inhale and then just go, listen, and just like tear this person just like down. Like, I don't think I'm not much of a fighter typically, like verbally or otherwise. Generally a non-confrontational individual, but sometimes something just pisses you off enough. What Iz was saying about the idea of the expression of self as an act of defiance, it calls to mind that Idol's album, Joy is an Act of Resistance. And I remember, admittedly, that was, that album
was kind of up or down for me musically and lyrically speaking. The idea of its title, though, I remember resonated with me intensely when I first heard it, because I was like, yeah, that is the statement to me that I've been like kind of feeling in myself for a while. And, you know, the idea of just being happy with who you are and not being afraid of that is a very defiant act sometimes, especially when you are an odd, when you're not a particularly mainstream person, you know, when your politics aren't mainstream, your race is, or your gender is if you're a minority person, you know, that can be extremely difficult to just feel comfortable in that. And I remember that resonated with me very deeply, the idea of protest being kind of within the self, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very gravitic statement that existing is itself a transgressive act. You know, you said that you came out initially in 2013. You know, my view on it, having a younger brother who's trans, you know, I'm being educated constantly on. He's way more into the history of you know, of all that, and the discourse is constantly evolving on it. Have you, Isabel, in your own time, seen any kind of real progress on the needle, or is it really just the same bullshit every day, just of like a different variation? You know, what is it?
That's a really good question. So, okay, this is how the timeline goes in my head. I came out in April 12th of 2013. I almost looked at you for confirmation, like you were. Yeah. Do you know the date that I came?
That sounds right to me.
That sounds right. April 12th of 2013. And that summer, Orange is the New Black came out. And that was a really interesting moment because Laverne Cox was suddenly front and center. This beautiful, tall, black trans woman who was very vocal. She refused to answer any invasive questions. She was a positive, just presence in the media, just right there. And still is. I don't say wasn't. I just mean that that was like the first person I can remember, especially, you know, trans people are always in media, but we're usually the butt of jokes. I mean, you watch movies even as early as recent as like 2010, and there's just like transphobic jokes all over the place.
I mean, I love the show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's one of my all-time favorite comedies. The one running thing on that show that I really, really struggle with, and I think they kind of managed to evolve enough to kind of leave it at a point that was tolerable, was the whole joke of Rob McElhenney with this transgender woman, and you know how it keeps getting played for laugh, like, oh bro, you can see your dick, you know. And it's like, you know, I remember even the first time watching the show being like, I feel like that's a bit dated, and now when I watch it, it's like makes me like very, very uncomfortable to watch. Yeah. It's like, this is wildly insensitive.
So when that was happening, so when that was happening was really interesting because it was like one of the first positive things like I remember seeing, and that kind of opened a national discourse. I think it was like the year after that Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time magazine, and it just kind of kept going from there. And so I've watched the discourse evolve over the last almost 10 years, over the time that I've been out so complexly, and it's been wild. I mean, it's been nuts. So to answer your question, yeah, I've seen it change a lot. And it still comes to the same bullshit in the sense of like, there's always going to be this group of people always saying like, you know, you want us to change how we think to match your delusions. And my thing is like, and I've explained this to so many people, you don't have to like, you don't have to like me. Because chances are I don't like you. You need to show me the most basic form of respect, because I'm going to show that to you regardless. I'm always a big believer in like, you know, you show people respect. You just do that. Even when you're angry with somebody, if I'm loathing somebody, chances are I am not raising my voice. I'm not swearing. I'm speaking complete sentences, because my thing is that like, I'm never going to be the one to lose my head. You just got to show me that in return. Just show me that in return. I'm gonna be fine. And so that exists on a day-to-day. That's never changed since I've been out. And from people that I know that are older, that's always been the way it is. But in terms of how we discuss these things, how we choose as a community to communicate with each other, to communicate with the outside world, and move forward in a socio-political landscape, that's evolved a ton.
I mean, I see it in the form of the fact that people actually express their outrage now. Not even express. The fact that people are outraged when these things, happen now. I mean, we spoke very, very briefly and non-specifically about Dave Chappelle in the lead up here to the interview. But I imagine if that special had come out about 10 years ago, if it even got noted, it would have been such a blip on the radar.
Yeah.
That this is basically now calling into question Netflix's validity as like an organization to some people. That the fact that Netflix fired somebody who's trans in the wake of that. And media is noticing.
Yeah.
I mean, I see it blow up constantly on my social media. And to me, while I'm not particularly active on social media myself, seeing that this outrages people is an encouraging thing to me.
Yeah. That
people are, willing to stand up, because people need to be willing to stand up before anything is going to be changed.
Yeah.
So something, and I agree with that. And the Isabel, your point of basically just respecting human dignity and all things, because that's really the best starting point you can have for an interaction. Something I wanted to touch on, though, with this idea of openly expressing outrage is, in our pre-interview conversation, also we were talking about this idea of generations within the queer community and the sort of fractious relationship that exists between generations, harkening back to Stonewall and the AIDS crisis and the sort of severing of the chain, if you like, that caused. You said that Gen Zers, which is for the folks at home, basically younger folks who are just coming up, who are entering at this point young adulthood and really contending with the forces of the world. You drew a fairly distinct separation between these Gen Zers and millennials in the sense of caution on expressing outrage. Could you speak a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So I think that I think I was saying this in the pre-interview that I love the Gen Z is so ready to just like war. Like they wake up and they choose violence, and there's a part of me that loves that. I love that brazen fearlessness. It's beautiful, and I love meeting young queer people, young trans people, especially when I meet trans people who are like in their early teens. I mean, I didn't have those resources. I mean, I would say in retrospect, yeah, I knew what was going on, but at the moment, no, I didn't. And I had no idea.
Not concrete.
No, not concretely. But if I had the resources, if I had the access to the representation in the media that we do now, I probably would have come out when I was in high school. And so I love meeting teenagers who are out. I'm like, that's great. That's good. That's so good for you. And then, of course,
have to miss a decade of their life, more or less.
Yeah. And there's the part, my maternal instinct that's like, let me take care of you. What do you need? I will be the mom. Like, what do you need? And I think that's beautiful. That's great. What I do get worried for a couple things. You had brought up that there's no caution. There's no exercising caution.
Not no caution. It's just, I think what I see sometimes is this idea of I have no fear. Nothing makes me afraid. And, perhaps this comes from a place of me being a fairly anxious, introspective person, but I always kind of, it's almost like the Yoda in me, like, you will be. Like, there's a lot that, frankly, we should be afraid of. And not that should stop us, not that should stop us from doing what is right. But I think, action without caution, action without fear can be just as damaging and just as irresponsible, especially when it gets to the idea of like collateral damage. You know, when we start speaking for a community that hasn't necessarily asked to be spoken for, that can cause quite a bit of damage.
Yeah,
it's been seen many, many times throughout history, and if we're not careful, we'll be seen again. You know,
I think another thing that I think is a very big generational divide between millennial queers and Gen Z queers, and I'm still trying to figure out personally if I think this is a for better or worse kind of thing, is the idea of safe spaces and discussion. And because there's a part of me that's like, obviously I think it's important to have safe spaces. It's important to sit down and discuss, these are my pronouns, this is how I feel about these words, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also a part of me that's like, the world does not give a fuck.
Yeah, the world is indifferent.
The world's completely indifferent to how you feel about it. And you need to learn to assert yourself in spite of that. The world, there was somebody, I can't remember her name. She had a great video about this, but she was like, the world doesn't have a trigger warning. Life doesn't have a trigger warning.
No, it certainly doesn't.
And you can't, the more we cultivate an online presence of like everything has a trigger warning, the kind of more dangerous it is when you're navigating the political landscape of the world, because like you can't stop and go, sorry, are you about to call me a slur? They're just gonna call you the slur.
Right.
And like that,
there's this like weird joke. I feel like even I have kind of joked about this a few times, like the idea of like, oh, I'm sorry that I used the wrong slur on you.
Oh yeah,
let me correct myself. Like, let me be more respectful and use the correct slur on you.
Yeah,
like that's weird, you know, like weird sort of surreal changes that woke culture creates, not necessarily in a bad way, just like it's very surreal sometimes.
It's super surreal. And so I get worried about that with younger generations, because I'm like, but there's also part of me too that's like, no, I mean, like, you should be advocating for those things. You should want trigger warnings for life, but that doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be able to walk around at 3 a.m.
Yeah. I mean, I had two kids who I went to elementary school with. I grew up for several years in Syracuse. These two kids went there. And, you know, they kind of came in the middle of the school year, and they were like these kind of two weird kids. And, you know, we were all kind of like, oh, what's the deal with these kids? And we very quickly found out, oh, they're from a place called Bosnia. It's in Europe. There's a war there, you know, and we were like, oh, okay, whatever, you know, second grade, you know, understanding is, you know, those kids didn't have, and their families didn't have any opportunity or warning as to what was about to happen in their lives. It just happened to them in the most awful, horrific way, you know. And thank God those guys got out. My friends, you know, who did, who I made when I was a kid. But, you know, this is the reality of the world. And this is a world that, you know, really is that was only 20 some years ago. I mean, there's still things like this happening very much to this day.
In this country, even.
In this country.
Yeah.
There's.
I think, does that answer? I kind of feel like we got kind of sidetracked. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point. I don't want to get too deep into it because a lot of it's philosophical, which means it's worth talking about, but maybe not talking about for too long because you can get lost in it.
Yeah, certainly not.
It has been a while though since we were last in the philosophy zone.
My sort of response to that would just be that safe spaces inherently are reactive, and they are reacting to a fundamental callousness in the world. They're not in and of themselves a cure for the world's ills. At best, you know, they sort of engender the sense of community and confidence within people to give free expression, but they're not the final answer to everything. I agree.
And they shouldn't be. Yeah, I think that's where I get concerned, is with this assumption that, like, oh, well,
this will continue, and no, it won't.
Yeah.
It's, you know, childhood and your youth should be a safe thing. It should be a time to learn who you are safely and in a cultivating, nurturing environment. But we also have to be prepared for childhood to end one day, you know.
I mean, people have to have the ability to sort of flourish in chaos. I mean, to a degree with things, you can give yourself this illusion of control on how other people are going to act, and it's to no good end.
There's a lot of things I've learned in my life that I hope people don't have to learn the way I learned them. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
You always try to do a little bit better for the next.
Yeah.
Yeah, those hard lessons, while they really help you grow a lot, it's not always the most preferred way to grow, There's a reason why it's called the hard way.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, part of you always wants to take that, experience and be like, hey, all right, I already figured out the hard math here. Here's the gist of what you need to know. Just take that piece and don't worry about how I got there.
My children someday.
Yeah. How will it teach these lessons to your children? Because I'll be aunt to your kids, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
That's kind of,
that idea.
Yeah.
How do you, what does this get imparted to the next generation?
Yeah.
So speaking of this notion of growth, and evolution's probably not the correct term. We'll just leave it at growth. At the top of the interview, we talked kind of jokingly about this being a seance for Tina Panic Noise. At the taping of this interview, the project has just played its last show, and at Mohawk Place, it was kind of billed as a funerary event a little bit. What's coming down the pipeline? I mean, is this the end of the musical journey and its intersection with the lived life, or are we going on to different things?
It's time for the Requiem.
Max and I we've mentioned already, we've been friends for long. We've been friends since we were 13. And
we've been playing music together since we were 15.
Yeah. So
we learned how to play music together effectively.
Yeah. So I think there's no world where we're not constantly writing music together, and separately also. I mean, we're both very avid, I would say composers, and we're constantly making things.
Constantly.
So no, there is stuff in the works. We're nothing solid yet, and so I'm like a little hesitant to put a face on a cloud of gas.
Yeah, exactly. I think it'll coalesce hopefully in the upcoming months.
Yeah.
But
that's definitely not the end. Definitely not the end.
No, certainly not. Certainly not. There will be more. It just won't be. It won't be under the name of Tina Panic Noise,
and it won't be that sound anymore.
Probably that sound so much, but I think it will be reminiscent though. In a way, because it is still the same people creating it.
So speaking of that sound being put to rest along with the band, what did the sound of Tina Panic Noise mean to you in that time period that you were making that music?
That's a good question.
I think for me, I kind of, when Iz was talking earlier about writing lyrics and all this, I had this kind of weird thought that I never really had before just now, but the idea of sometimes when you need somebody who can empathize with you, when you need somebody who has the same experience as you and nobody else around you is like that, music, lyrics, writing can be a way to create that person, create that friendship with somebody who has the same experiences as you. And for me, that was what making music like that was. I just finally, there were no bands that were playing the sort of music that I wanted to make. So, being able to start a band that played that kind of music was very, very affirming to me. Almost like, that idea of like, I don't want to say Tina Panic Noise was my favorite band, but I always enjoyed listening to our music, and that was always, I think, my favorite thing about us, that I never got sick of listening to our music. Yeah,
I one thing that I always stuck with was that my favorite thing that came out of it is that we wrote music that I wanted to listen to. It was something that, especially at that time, because I think at that time when we first started, my favorite bands were Coat Hangers, Leader Kinney, Mannequin Pussy. Really early Cherry Glazer. I used to listen to a lot of that first album.
All fantastic bands, but
hell yeah,
none of them were around us. They were all elsewhere, scattered to the wind.
And and none of them really exactly did what I was looking for and what you were looking for. So I think it was a matter of cutting up the piece. One of our biggest influences is Screaming Females.
Certainly. And we don't really particularly sound all that much like Screaming Females.
Yeah, and we don't sound like Mannequin Pussy. We don't sound like Sleater Kinney.
But we have elements of each.
We have elements of each one because we we were like, okay, well, I like this part.
Where you have those influences kind of like mixed in the stew there.
Yeah, and so I think that I really wanted to make something that spoke to me. The only other album at that time that I knew of that was really speaking about trans issues was Transgender Dysphoria Blues by Against Me.
Yeah.
And that one was extremely important to me coming out. And that's a whole other story, which you were there for a lot of that.
Oh, yeah.
But that album really spoke to me lyrically. But musically speaking, that is not the sound we had. And that's not
even a little. But.
And that's also not even my favorite Against Me album, sonically speaking. So, like, it's really interesting that we were just like, okay, like a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and we kind of smashed it together. And I don't know, we made something that I really liked.
Created the band that we wanted to listen to.
Yeah,
that's to me what was so. It was fantastic at the time. It still is on a level, but it's not necessarily the band I want to listen to all the time anymore.
Yeah.
So now it's time to create the new band that I want to listen to.
So we killed it.
Yeah, so we killed it, and stabbed it in the back alley, and it's all done now.
That makes a lot of sense, though, because when you have something that no longer is, as you were saying in the previous conversation, when your life changes, the music that you were really in tune with before now is in tune with your past and not your present. Do you find it difficult to find that new sound, or have you already discovered it or created, or really both, for the period of your life that you're in now?
Well, I think one thing that's important to note is throughout the pandemic, there was a couple things that were happening that were particular to us. One, a lot of bands, a lot of our peers around here took that time to really, hammer in their sound.
Yeah.
Like, coming to mind, Passed Out,
who we just played with Saturday.
They've always had a really great, like, indie punk sound. But, man, they took the pandemic to, like, they just hammer it, like,
coalesced into it
and hone it. I mean, so good. And they've always been a band that we loved, but like we saw them about a month or so ago.
Yeah,
at Nietzsche.
Well, she had seen them and was like, they've gotten really, really good. And then I went out and just caught the having the guy to go out right in time to see them a few weeks later, and I like texted her and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, like we were like, oh, like
really damn
we
good.
always knew they were good, but like, wow, like we didn't know you could be wow. So like that was cool to watch that with our peers, but unfortunately Max is a nurse, and so we couldn't meet as much during the pandemic. There was that. The partner I live with is immunocompromised, so it was a lot of dangers. And so we weren't really working, and I was going through a lot. Like, I took that time to really, really work a lot in therapy and work on myself. And we kind of got to this point where every other week we were like, should we kill the band? Should we just change the sound? Should we rebrand? What are we going to do?
How are we fixing this?
And initially we were like, we're just going to rebrand it. And then after a while, I kind of realized that, like, I have an association with that name already. And so we wanted to move, and we were already starting to move more in a kind of post-punky kind of sound. And not just that, but that's kind of the general area, I can say. And I think that after a while, I personally felt so associated as Tina Panic Noise, aggression, violent aggression. That doesn't fit anymore.
It doesn't.
So that was a big part of why we decided to kill it and maybe move in this other direction we were already moving in. That made sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, take that chapter and said, all right, this was an important moment. We're on to the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's time to write the new one.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So my question would be for those who are looking to feel the aggressive energy. Where can you find the music these days?
Broadly speaking, or Buffalo specifically?
Well, no, for Tina Panic Noise. Where are you guys at?
We're on Spotify, we're on Bandcamp.
Yeah, Spotify and Bandcamp would be the two best ways.
I think we're on the other ones too.
Yeah, if you ever run into either one of us out on the street, we've got about 5 million discs burning a hole.
Yeah. If you run into one of us on the street and like have questions about it, like, it's kind of funny because, like, I feel like people have approached us in public, and I probably look annoyed. And it's not that I'm annoyed; it's that I get kind of easily exasperated. And it's not just with music. Like, I once was at my job, and someone walked in, and they recognized me from my jewelry page, and they were like, "You're the Bruja," and I was like, "What?
Am I?
Who do you? How do you know me?" And so but I always love hearing people's thoughts on our music.
Yeah.
When we first started playing "I'm Fine," which has weirdly become like our most popular song, I would have people stopping me and being like, "I love that song," and telling me what it means to them. And I loved that. Really loved that, because when I wrote that song, it was not, I wrote it as a throwaway. I wrote it as something really stupid. It was like a tongue-in-cheek joke for myself.
Well, even like the way the kind of writing came together on that, I remember Sean and Iz playing that, and I was kind of walking in. I don't know if I had been like outside and came back in, or if I was getting there late. And I remember hearing them play this like bass line, and I'm like, "The fuck are you guys playing Black Flag? Like, why is that?" Because it's very, very similar to a Black Flag song, which I won't mention by name, but it's very, very similar structurally to that.
And I didn't even realize it.
And it was like, "No, but it's like pretty good though." Like try to come up with something. And I'm like, okay, I have like one idea that
You're roped me in, all right.
Okay, like, let me try this one thing. And once I started playing the guitar riff, I'm like, no, actually, there might be something to this.
Yeah.
Actually,
I wasn't
this actually might be kind of cool. Like,
I wasn't intentionally trying to do anything. I was just like, I wanted something, especially at that time. I was having a lot of problems with my hands.
Yeah, and it's a nice box riff.
So I didn't have to move my hands. So I was like, oh, okay, I can do this, and that's really easy. And so then and again, I did not think we would do anything with that at all. Like, I never really had intentions of playing it. And then we played it, and then our friends who are in Lung, who played our last show with us, they're really close friends of ours, they're from Cincinnati. We put it up, we recorded it again, like at last second. We didn't plan on recording it, but like, it's really quick song, it's really easy, so we figured we'd do it. And we put up a Bandcamp.
Pretty easy.
And I think like within 24 hours, Kate called me and was like, "That song, that's the song." And I was like, "Really? Okay."
Yeah.
I mean, sure.
And there are songs that I think are far, far more brilliantly written, like from a compositional standpoint, are much more clever, or what have you.
The songs that I thought lyrically I did better on.
But I have to say, if I was just a casual listener flipping through a band's discography and I heard that song, I'd be like, "That's fun,"
Sick, yeah.
and that's why I think that one works, because it's just. Yeah, it's fun, It's
that's one that speaks.
Fun.
That's one that speaks to the aggression. That is the song. I think that's
quite aggressive.
Yeah, that was. And when I wrote it, it was I want to say it was about.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so it was written about a coworker who, like, you'd be like, "Hey, how was your weekend?" And he'd be like, "Good," and then he wouldn't ask. He would never ask how you were doing. And he was so rude, and I hated him. And so the song was supposed to be like, "Thanks, I'm fine. Thanks for asking."
Yeah. Just the ultimate pettiness.
Yeah. But, a lot of people took it to mean different things for themselves. One of our close friends, she says that the song reminds her of just like getting through your day. Like, I'm doing just fine. I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. And being frustrated when people keep asking you, like, "Oh, how are you doing?" And it's like, "I'm fine. I'm fine." And I really liked that she had a completely different interpretation. Other people were telling us that. And across the board, though, it's aggression. People are like, I'm fine.
Yeah.
That pissed off, "I'm fine," and I'm like, "Good, be pissed off, feel that."
So I mean, to sort of unify that with the rest of the interview, I mean, there's something beautiful in that, right? I mean, you have this act of creation born out of the hyper specificity of one's individual circumstance, but it leads to a universal response to it. We'll be sure to get that song in the credits if we can get permission to do so.
Absolutely.
We are just about at time. I just wanted to ask one question about Burning Bruja, and then give the last question over to my co-host, Shamil. So I noticed you're making some pretty rad jewelry, and I just wanted to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I started making that. I started doing this stuff during the pandemic because my mom's like an avid crafter, and she had all these tools that she was getting rid of, and she was like, "Hey, I got this stuff. Do you want it?" And I had taken like a jewelry making class with our old neighbor, Mariana.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Oh, I'm taking this class." And Mariana was just like cute as a butt, and she was like, "Do you want to come to this class with me?" And I was like, "Whatever you want to do, yeah, whatever, sure." And so we went. We had a really great day, and that class was like 2 years ago. So my mom had these tools, and I was just kind of like messing around, and I was like, "Well, this is kind of fun." And it just became like a thing for me to hyper focus on during the pandemic. I grew up practicing witchcraft. I'm still an avid practitioner. Practice every day. It's very important to me, and I'm also I love Satanist music because I think there's a particular, there's a string in there that resonates with me. I'm a big fan of Lingua Ignota and Chelsea Wolfe, even though they're not specifically Satanist, that kind of dark atmosphere. And so I started making these pieces while listening to this music, and it kind of came together. I had no intention of it being a thing that I ever really shared with anybody. But I was running out of space to put the jewelry, and my partner was like, "You got to do something with this." Like, I don't wear a lot of jewelry. I wear very simple stuff. I don't wear really complicated stuff that I make. And so my partner was like, "You got to please find some place to put this." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll give some stuff away." So I put it on Facebook and Instagram, being like, "If anyone wants to like toss me a couple bones for this, like, cool." And then it just kind of blew up.
I really liked it.
Yeah, and that was really nice because my big thing lately is people have been giving me pieces of jewelry from past loved ones, or just even pieces from when they broke forever ago and they want back and they want made into new things. And I've been able to revitalize. I just did a pair of earrings for somebody who the main thing they wanted was these antique spoons that were their mother's, and their mother had passed away a few months ago. And so they had asked me to take these antique spoon handles and some other jewelry and make it into these earring sets. And I did, and that was really beautiful. I got to work with this trusted piece, and so that's been really important to me lately.
Wow.
Well, now so you're going back to school now, hopefully.
Oh yeah, so I also recently just applied to learn how to do metalworking. So I will hopefully be making metals and making more complex stuff. So that's the next step is getting even more complex and making my own metals and stuff with it. So yeah,
Beautiful.
That's awesome. Glad to hear that you have a lot of different projects, on the upcoming. My last question for the night is, kind of tapping back to the differences between the Gen Z and the millennial queers. What would be a good way to reach out to those younger members of the community and sort of share experiences with them, help them not feel like they're alone? Like what ways do you recommend that people can start with from your own experiences?
That's a really good question. I think, the internet's great for that as much as it is bad for that. The internet can easily create echo chambers. But weirdly enough, the thing that I saw over the last year, TikTok's created a lot of discourse, again, for better or worse. But I will say that I have felt that the majority of discourse on there has been positive. I think that the important thing too, though, is not just for Gen Z, but for millennials. We need to be a lot more patient because we tend to get very frustrated when Gen Z doesn't listen to us immediately in terms of like, this is how we experiencing things. And then we get frustrated and listen to us. And I'm like, but they're literally still kids.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's so ironic to me. I feel this all the time when I think about when I was 18 or 19 and people who were like 30 would be like, well, you'll see in a few years. And I was just like, shut up. Shut your mouth.
And now you're that person,
I'm like, oh, you'll see in a few years.
Yeah. I've seen that so much. And there's like a term that we're all throwing around of like, please go outside and touch some grass. And you have like, get off. But also like, and I remember being when I was like first out, I was 20. and like older, and granted, like there was a lot of stuff that I still disagree with. Like,
a lot of it was just people being genuine assholes.
But like, there's a couple of things that people were like I was so hyper focused on like, I need to pass, I need to make sure, and I need to lose all this weight, and I need to do this and do that. And there were people who were just slightly older than me that were trained, so I've been out longer, who were like, you're gonna see that is not as important as your mental. Like, you're gonna see that that's not the important aspect of your mental health. And I was like, you don't know anything, but they did. And I was so wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
It turns out that, like, no, making sure I'm happy is the most important thing. And I think that's kind of the discourse we need to have with each other, is like, asking each other, how are you doing?
And I think the other thing too, maybe for our generation, the millennial generation, to try and remember how hard it was to accept that somebody maybe knows a little more than you when you were like 18 or 19. Like, try to remember that when dealing with the younger generation, because, you know, it isn't easy to have to admit that somebody maybe knows a little something more than you. So that patience that you talk about, I think, is critical.
Yeah.
Critical.
I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Well, on that positive note, folks, patience reigns. Show patience and basic human dignity to everyone. And, that's about the best you can do. It's all controlled chaos from there on out. All right, I'm Devin Mullen.
I'm Mike Shamil.
And this has been Isabel and Max from the specter of Tina Panic Noise. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Here's an excerpt from the song I'm Fine by Tina Panic Noise. You can check out all their old music on Bandcamp.
When you look at me and pay attention,
The Eighth Note Sessions are produced by Music is Art. Help keep programs like this going by donating today at musicasart.org. Thank you for listening.